Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. I never thought I'd have a night like that. My name's Alex, and I've been working as a delivery driver in the small town of Ridgeview, California for just over a year now. It's not exactly the most exciting job, but it pays the bills, and most nights are pretty chill. Just pizza, a few deliveries, and maybe the occasional strange order. Nothing ever prepared me for the night. Everything went sideways. It started out like any other shift. It was around 9:30 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was working the closing hours. The roads were quiet, and I liked it that way. Less traffic, no rush. After the initial lull, an order popped up. A large pepperoni pizza with 2 sides of wings. The name on the ticket was James, and the address was located far out on the edge of town. Ridgeview is a small, sleepy place, so it's not unusual for people to live on dirt roads or in isolated pockets of land. I didn't think anything of it. Just another late-night delivery to some remote property. I grabbed the pizza, shoved it into my insulated bag, and hit the road. The first few miles were fine. Familiar streets, the usual mix of suburban homes. But the farther I drove, the darker it got. The streetlights disappeared, and soon I was cruising down a narrow, winding road. I glanced at the GPS on my phone. The directions looked right, but my gut started to twist. The address led me to a dirt path, more of a trail than an actual road, that seemed to go on forever. I passed a few patches of dry fields, the moonlight casting long shadows over the landscape. No signs of life. No houses. It was eerily quiet. When the GPS indicated that I'd arrived, I came to a slow stop. I was at the end of a dirt road, but there was nothing. No house, no driveway, just more dirt and a scattering of overgrown bushes. The address had led me into the middle of nowhere. I pulled over, unsure of what to do. The uneasy feeling in my stomach was growing. Maybe they put in the wrong address? Maybe this was some kind of prank? I reached for my phone and dialed the number listed on the order. After 2 rings, a man's gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Hey, this is the pizza guy," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm at the address you gave me, but I don't see a house. Are you sure this is right?" There was a long pause on the other end. Then the man's voice came through again, oddly calm. "Nah, you're in the right place. Just wait there. We'll come to you." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I should have listened to my gut and left right then. But instead, I just sat there, my hand trembling as I held the phone. I hadn't been waiting long when I heard it, a faint rumble in the distance. Motorcycles. 2 bikes suddenly appeared from nowhere, their headlights slicing through the dark like searchlights. They weren't coming from the road, but from the fields on either side of me, cutting across the grass like they'd been waiting for me. The bike screeched to a halt in front of my car, blocking me in. The riders were dressed in dark gear, helmets with mirrored visors that reflected nothing but the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest. One of the bikers dismounted and walked toward my car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. He leaned in, his voice muffled by the helmet. "Hey!" he shouted, his tone clipped. "Step out for a second." I didn't even hesitate to roll the window down a crack. "Is there a problem?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite the panic surging through me. "Yeah," he said, lowering his head until the helmet was level with my window. "We need your keys." "Excuse me? Your keys," he repeated, his voice colder now. "Hand them over or this gets ugly." I didn't have to look at the other guy to know something was wrong. I could see him standing a few feet behind, holding something shiny and long in his hand. A crowbar. My heart raced. I didn't know what else to do. Without thinking, I slammed the car into reverse and floored the gas pedal. The tires spun out, digging into the loose dirt before they finally caught. The guy who had approached my window lunged at the car, slamming his fists onto the hood, shouting something I couldn't hear over the engine. The other rider started his bike and sped after me, the roar of the motorcycle like a hellhound chasing me down. I had no idea how I managed to keep control of the car as I sped down the dirt road, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The guy on the bike was right behind me, his headlights flooding my rearview mirror, closing in with every second. Desperation kicked in when I saw a small, faint side road ahead. My hands were shaking as I yanked the wheel to the left, praying the biker would overshoot it. To my relief, he didn't see it in time. I whipped the car around the corner, narrowly avoiding the trees that lined both sides of the path. I could hear the motorcycle's engine in the distance, but for the moment I had a chance to breathe. I kept my foot on the gas, speeding down the narrow road as fast as I dared, and then, in the distance, I saw it. A porch light flickering in the distance. A house. I didn't even slow down as I pulled into the driveway, my car bouncing over the uneven ground. Without a second thought, I threw the car into park, jumped out, and ran to the door. I banged on it, terrified, my fists pounding the wood. "Help! Someone's after me." The door opened, and an older man with a weathered face appeared. He looked confused but didn't hesitate. "What's going on?" I turned just in time to see the motorcycle's headlight flicker, then disappear into the trees. The man let me in immediately and called the police. I sat there, shaking and trying to catch my breath as the phone rang. When the police arrived, the bikers were long gone. The officers examined my car, finding a shattered rear window and several dents in the hood, but nothing was stolen. They told me I was lucky. Apparently, fake delivery addresses like the one I'd received were a common trick for carjackers in the area. I never returned to that job after that night, and every time I drive down a lonely stretch of road, I can still hear the rumble of those motorcycles in my head. I won't forget that night anytime soon. I'm not a fan of working the late shift, but it pays the bills. My name's Nick, and I've been delivering pizzas for the past 2 years in the small town of Redwood Pines, California. The job is pretty straightforward. Drop off a pizza, get a tip, repeat. Most nights are quiet. Suburban houses, the occasional office party, or maybe a group of college students staying up late. But that night, I got an order that would haunt me for months. It was around 8:30 p.m., and I was nearing the end of my shift. After a long day of deliveries, I was ready to head home and relax. But then the order came in. A large pepperoni, cheesy bread, and a soda. The ticket was ordinary, but the address? That's where things got weird. The delivery was to a campsite about 15 minutes outside of town, near the Redwood National Forest. I looked at the ticket and raised an eyebrow. "Do we even deliver to campsites?" I asked my manager. He shrugged. "We've done it before. They're willing to pay the delivery fee." I wasn't thrilled about the idea of driving into the woods at night, but the tips from those kinds of orders were usually pretty good. Plus, it was the last delivery of the night. I loaded up the order, grabbed my insulated bag, and headed out. The drive started uneventfully, with the main road well lit and smooth. But the further I went, the more isolated it became. The streetlights faded away, and the darkness crept in around me. I turned on my high beams, and the trees on either side of the road seemed to close in like silent sentinels. By the time I reached the campsite entrance, everything felt off. The air was cooler, and there was an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I parked near the entrance and grabbed the pizza, but the only thing that greeted me was darkness. The ticket said the customer was at campsite 14, but there were no signs or maps to help me find it. I pulled up the flashlight on my phone and started walking, the dirt path crunching underfoot. I passed a few quiet tents and RVs, but no one was around. It was so quiet that the only sound was the wind through the trees and the occasional call of an owl. After a few minutes of walking, I decided to call the customer to get better directions. "Hey, this is your pizza delivery guy," I said when they picked up. "I'm at the campsite. Where should I meet you?" There was a long pause on the other end, and then a low voice finally responded. "Just keep walking. I'm by the fire." Before I could ask anything else, the call abruptly disconnected. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the signal was bad. I continued down the path, feeling a sense of unease grow with every step. The trees around me seemed to press in closer, and the distant sounds of the campsite grew quieter. Something wasn't right, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was just overthinking it. Then I saw it. A faint glow ahead. A campfire, flickering in the dark. It was the only light in the area. I quickened my pace, relieved that I'd finally found the right spot. But when I got there, my stomach sank. The fire was burning brightly, but there was no one around. No campers, no voices, just the crackling of the fire in the silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice carrying into the night. "Pizza delivery." Nothing. I stood there for a moment, uncertainty creeping in. The feeling in my gut grew worse, and I was starting to second guess whether I should just leave. Maybe the customer had gone somewhere, and I could try to call again. That's when I heard it, a rustling from the trees behind me. I froze, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling now. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the trees. He was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face. The dim light from the campfire reflected off something shiny in his hand. A knife. "Give me your money," he said, his voice low and threatening. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I don't have much," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He took a step closer, raising the knife slightly. I said, "Give me your money." In a panic, I fumbled for my wallet. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I pulled out the cash I had, probably about $20, and held it out to him. Before he could grab it, a voice suddenly rang out from the darkness. "Hey, what's going on over there?" A flashlight beam cut through the trees, and a man's voice called again, this time with authority. "Get away from him." The knife-wielding man hesitated, looking between me and the flashlight. For a brief second, the tension hung in the air. Then, without a word, the attacker spun on his heels and bolted back into the woods. I stood frozen, my heart still hammering in my chest. The camper with the flashlight approached, looking me over with concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softening as he came closer. Yeah, I think so," I said, though I could barely get the words out. I was still trying to process what had just happened. The camper called the police, and about 20 minutes later, officers arrived. They searched the area but didn't find the man. One of the officers pulled me aside and told me I was lucky. Apparently, there had been reports of similar incidents in the area recently, and this was a known tactic used by thieves. I drove back to the pizza place, my hands still shaking. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of the knife in the man's hand or the cold stare behind his hood. I never went back to the delivery job. It wasn't just the fear or the close call that pushed me out. It was the realization that things could have ended so much worse. Without that camper, I don't even want to imagine what might have happened. My name's Noah, and back in my early 20s, I worked as a pizza delivery driver in a small town just outside of San Bernardino, California. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills while I was finishing up my college degree. Most nights were uneventful, typical deliveries, the occasional chat with regulars, and the occasional mix-up with orders. But there's one delivery I'll never forget, and it's a memory that still haunts me to this day. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late spring, around 8:30 p.m., when I got an order to deliver a pizza to a house in one of those suburban neighborhoods. The kind where every house looks identical, with neatly trimmed lawns and streetlights spaced too far apart, leaving patches of shadow between the houses. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and the roads were almost empty. Just another ordinary night. I was just about to call it a day, hoping for an early finish, when the order popped up. The address was only a few miles away, so I grabbed the pizza and headed out. The traffic was light, and I didn't think much about the drive. I was still on autopilot, following the route my GPS gave me, left here, right there, when something caught my attention. A car had been trailing me for a few blocks. At first, it was nothing more than an odd feeling. I checked my rearview mirror. The car was a few cars back, but it was following me at the same pace, making the same turns. I told myself I was just being paranoid. People drive similar routes all the time. But after a couple more turns, the car was still there. Every time I glanced in the mirror, it was there, hanging back just enough to stay out of the too close zone, but close enough to feel intentional. By the time I pulled into the neighborhood, my stomach was in knots. It wasn't a busy part of town, and the streets were eerily quiet. I convinced myself I was being dramatic. The driver was probably just heading in the same direction. Nothing to worry about. But when I pulled up to the address, the car slowed down and parked a few houses behind mine, blocking the streetlight from where I was parked. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. For a moment, I sat in my car, staring out at the street, weighing my options. I could call the customer and ask them to come out and get the pizza, but that felt weird, and besides, I didn't want to seem paranoid. I took a deep breath and grabbed the pizza bag, trying to push the uneasy feeling from my mind. I had a job to do, after all. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I heard 2 car doors slam behind me. I froze. 2 men had gotten out of the car, parked a few houses away, and they were walking toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. They weren't running, but there was something about the way they moved that made my heart race. My instincts screamed at me that this wasn't just some coincidence. They were coming for me. I didn't know why, but I knew it wasn't good. "Hey man, hold up a sec," one of them called out. I didn't answer. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced myself to keep walking toward the house. I couldn't get back to my car in time. It was parked too far from me, and even if I tried, I'd never make it before they caught me. "Hey man, we just want to talk," the other one shouted. "Don't make this hard." That was it. I turned around and bolted, no time to think. My heart pounded in my ears as I sprinted for the customer's house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear them behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I hammered on the door, hoping someone would hear me before it was too late. "Who is it?" came a voice from inside. "Delivery!" I shouted, my throat tight with fear. "Please open the door. Someone's chasing me!" The door creaked open just enough for me to slip inside. The customer, a middle-aged man, looked completely shocked to me standing and wide-eyed. I tried to explain what was happening, pointing toward the window, but I was out of breath. All I could think about was getting inside, locking the door, and hoping the men wouldn't get any closer. Through the window, I saw them standing by my car, watching. When they saw me inside, their expressions shifted. There was this flash of anger, like I had ruined whatever they were planning. Then, without another word, they turned and ran back to their car. I watched, heart pounding, as they sped off, tires screeching in the night. The customer called the cops, and I stayed inside, my mind racing as I tried to calm down. The officers arrived quickly and took my statement. I gave them a vague description of the car and the 2 men, but honestly, I was too shaken up to remember any real details. I couldn't even tell them what kind of car it was. All I could remember was the way they moved, like they knew exactly what they were doing. It turns out the police were already on the lookout for a vehicle matching that description. The two men had been reported in a nearby town for trying to lure people into their car. They were caught that same night, parked outside another neighborhood. I never went back to that delivery job. After that night, I couldn't shake the fear. I was always looking over my shoulder, especially when a car stayed behind me for too long. The whole experience changed the way I saw the world. You go into a job like pizza delivery thinking it's just another night, another delivery, but then something like that happens and you realize how vulnerable you really are. To this day, I don't know exactly what those guys wanted from me. I don't want to know, but I'm thankful I trusted my gut and ran when I did. The whole thing was a nightmare, and the memory still makes my heart race whenever I drive alone at night. It wasn't just a close call. It was a reminder that sometimes things aren't always as they seem. Last summer, I set off on a solo road trip through California, hoping to clear my head and shake off the weight of my everyday life. My name's Kyle, and after months of nonstop work, I figured a long drive down the coast was exactly what I needed, a chance to hit reset. The journey started off perfect. The California coastline, the sprawling deserts, and endless stretches of highway. But somewhere between Palm Springs and the San Bernardino Mountains, I realized I was in desperate need of a break. It was getting late and I was tired, so I pulled off the highway and checked into a cheap, rundown motel just outside a small town. The kind of place where the parking lot is half empty and the neon vacancy sign flickers like it's seen better days. It wasn't ideal, but it was late and I figured I'd only be there for the night. The motel's front desk guy was gruff, the kind of person you could tell had seen more than his fair share of shady characters. But I didn't think much of it. I just needed a bed and some food. My room was at the back of the property, ground floor, and the building felt oddly isolated. The windows were small, and the parking lot lights barely illuminated the area. I figured I was being paranoid. It was just a place to sleep, after all. After unpacking my things and setting my bags down, my stomach started growling. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and I wasn't in the mood to go back out again. So I decided to order a pizza. I found a place nearby that delivered and placed my order, then settled back on the bed, scrolling through my phone to kill time. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the air conditioner. Outside, the night was pitch black, with only the flickering neon light from the motel sign casting a faint glow. The sound of distant traffic from the highway was the only other noise. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. At first, it seemed normal, just a little louder than usual, but nothing alarming. I got up, peeked through the peephole, and saw a guy in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, standing there with a pizza bag in hand. He was dressed in a faded pizza delivery shirt and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look like anyone special, just your typical delivery guy. But there was something off about him. His posture, the way he stood with his hands in his pockets, it felt strange. I opened the door just enough to take the pizza and hand him the cash I'd already counted out. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and he seemed to hesitate for a moment before speaking. "Thanks," I said, reaching for the pizza. That's when he shifted his weight, and something in his voice made me pause. "Hey, sorry to ask, but could I use your restroom? It's kind of an emergency," he said, sounding like he was trying to keep his voice casual, but there was something in the way he spoke that didn't sit right. I froze. My gut immediately screamed, "Don't let him in." Something felt wrong about the request. I looked at him again, taking in his unkempt look, the way he shifted on his feet, and I knew that this wasn't just a harmless request. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "I don't think that's a good idea." He smiled again, but this time it didn't feel like a friendly gesture. It was forced, almost rehearsed. "Come on, man. "I've been driving all night and I really need to go. It'll just take a second," he said, stepping closer to the door. I instinctively pushed the door shut a little harder, keeping the chain lock in place. "I can't help you," I said, my voice a little shakier now. "Sorry." For a split second, his face fell. His smile disappeared completely. Then, in an instant, his entire demeanor shifted. The charm dropped away and his tone turned cold and threatening. "Look," he said, his voice low, almost growling, "I'm not asking. Open the door." My heart started pounding so fast I thought I might pass out. My instincts screamed at me to get away from the door, to lock it, to do anything. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught between panic and disbelief. I backed up and shoved the door closed as much as I could, fumbling to slide the deadbolt into place. But then the banging started. Loud, forceful hits against the door, followed by him yelling, "Let me in! I'm not gonna hurt you. Just open the damn door." My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed my phone with shaky hands and dialed the front desk. "There's a guy. He's trying to get into my room," I whispered, my voice cracking with fear. "He says he's the delivery guy, but he won't leave." The front desk clerk's voice was sharp and urgent. "Lock your door, stay inside, and don't open it. I'm calling the police right now." The banging continued, growing louder. It felt like the door was going to give way any second. In a panic, I grabbed the chair from the desk and shoved it under the doorknob, then dragged the dresser in front of the door for good measure, just to create some extra barrier between me and whatever was happening outside. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. I stood still, barely breathing, staring at the door. The silence felt deafening. I listened intently, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the next sound. But there was nothing. I heard distant sirens, and after what felt like an eternity, there was a knock at the door. "Police, it's safe to come out now," came a calm voice from the other side. I opened the door cautiously. The officers told me that they had found the man hiding in the bushes near the parking lot. They confirmed he wasn't a real delivery driver. He had stolen the uniform from someone else. He was a local criminal with a history of assault, breaking and entering, and other charges. I never slept that night. I kept replaying the moments when he tried to force his way in, and my mind racing with what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. I didn't order pizza to a motel room again after that. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. That night I learned that some instincts are meant to be listened to, and that sometimes a simple late-night meal can turn into something far darker than you could ever expect. This happened last year when a few friends and I decided to rent a cabin for the weekend. We wanted to get away from the city for a bit, just to relax and hang out somewhere quiet. The place we picked was in the mountains, surrounded by woods, about an hour and a half outside of town. It was cozy but remote, and the closest store was a 30-minute drive away. The trip started off great. We spent the first day hiking and playing board games. But by the second day, the weather turned. It started raining, no light drizzle, but a full-on downpour. By the afternoon, we were stuck inside, bored and hungry. That's when someone suggested ordering pizza. At first, I laughed. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one's delivering pizza out here. But my friend Danny pulled out the cabin's guest manual, which had a list of local services. Sure enough, there was a pizza place listed. The number looked old, but we decided to give it a try. To my surprise, someone actually picked up. The guy on the other end sounded a little annoyed, but took our order, 2 large pizzas, breadsticks, and a soda, and said he'd be there in about 45 minutes. The rain hadn't let up, and by the time the delivery guy arrived, it was already dark. We heard the sound of a car pulling up, headlights flashing through the rain-smeared windows. I grabbed some cash and went to open the door. The guy looked rough, mid-40s, scruffy beard, soaking wet from the rain. He was holding a pizza bag in one hand and a drenched baseball cap in the other. He handed over the food, and I gave him the cash, including a pretty decent tip, because I felt bad about making him drive all the way out here in the storm. But instead of leaving, he just stood there, shifting from foot to foot. "Hey, you mind if I come in for a bit?" he asked. I blinked, caught off guard. No offense, but we're kinda in the middle of something. Thanks for the delivery, though." He didn't move. "It's really coming down out here. Roads are bad. I just need to wait it out for a few minutes." Something about his tone made me uneasy. He wasn't asking so much as he was insisting. "Sorry, man," I said, trying to sound firm but polite. "We're not letting anyone in. Drive safe, though." That's when his expression changed. His face hardened and his eyes narrowed. "Come on, man," he said, his voice lower now. "I just need to stay dry for a bit. You think I drove all the way out here in this crap for fun?" Behind me, Danny and the others were starting to notice something was off. "Everything okay?" Danny called out from the kitchen. "Yeah, it's fine," I said quickly, trying to keep the situation from escalating. The guy took a step closer to the door, his wet shoes squeaking on the wooden porch. "You're really going to make me drive back out in this storm? After I busted my ass getting up here?" At this point, my heart was pounding. I didn't want to make him angrier, but there was no way I was letting him in. "Look, I'm sorry, but you've got to go," I said, my voice shaking a little. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like he was sizing me up. Then he muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't catch, and turned to leave. I watched as he walked back to his car, but he didn't get in. Instead, he stood there, looking back at the cabin. The rain was pouring down, but I could see him clearly under the light of the porch lamp. "What's he doing?" one of my friends whispered. "I don't know," I said, barely able to breathe. Then, without warning, he started walking back toward the cabin. "Lock the door," Danny said, his voice sharp. I slammed the door shut and turned the deadbolt just as the guy reached the porch. He banged on the door with his fist, campy, shouting something I couldn't make out over the sound of the rain. "Call the cops!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. Then I saw. No service. We scrambled to barricade the door with whatever we could find, a chair, a small table, even a broomstick wedged under the handle. My friends and I stood there, hearts racing, as the pounding went on and on. Eventually it stopped. For a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of rain. Then we heard his car start up and the tires crunching on gravel as he drove away. We stayed up the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. When the rain finally let up the next morning, we drove into town to report what had happened. The sheriff took our statement and told us we weren't the first ones to complain about that guy. Apparently, he had a history of harassing people in remote areas, though they'd never been able to pin anything serious on him. I don't know what he would have done if we'd let him in, and honestly, I don't want to know. But every time I think about that weekend, I get this sick feeling in my stomach. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.